the world around me shifted again. This time, it wasn't the endless darkness or the cavernous maze. I was standing on solid ground now, in what appeared to be a vast, open space, a field bathed in soft moonlight. The air was clean, fresh, and free of the suffocating dread that had once gripped me. I blinked, disoriented. The oppressive atmosphere was gone. The nightmares, the horrors of the game, gone. Everything was eerily peaceful now, as though the game had never even existed. I could hear the sound of wind rustling through the grass, the chirping of distant birds. But something about it felt wrong. It felt too serene, too perfect. This couldn't be real. Then, from behind me, I heard a voice, a familiar voice. "You've made it." I spun around to find the woman with the bird standing there, her cage now empty, the bird gone. Her eyes were wide, full of sorrow, but there was something else in them too, something I couldn't quite place. I started, my voice shaky. How are you here?" We were all part of this," she interrupted, her voice soft but steady. "We were all part of the same game. And now, you're here, with the rest of us." The field around us began to ripple like water, the edges distorting as if reality itself was slipping through our fingers. The shadows began to stretch, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread creeping back into my chest. The woman reached out, touching my arm. Her touch was cold, and her eyes were filled with a sorrow that seemed to bleed into the very air around us. "It's never over," she whispered. "The game, it doesn't let you go." I tried to pull away from her grasp, but I couldn't move. My legs felt frozen, as if the earth itself was holding me in place. "No," I breathed, panic rising in my chest. "No. This isn't real. It's just a dream." The ground beneath me cracked open, and I felt myself falling once again. The peaceful field disappeared, replaced by an infinite void, black and endless. The whispers returned, louder this time, as if they were consuming everything. The woman's face twisted in agony, her features contorting into something grotesque. "It's always watching," she said, her voice now a distorted mockery of itself. "You can never escape." And then, I understood. The endless game. The game had never ended. The entire world, the reality I had known, was just another layer of the game. Every step I took, every decision I made, had only led me deeper into its labyrinth. There was no escape, no victory. The horrors, the trials, the choices, it was all a part of a never-ending cycle. I was back in the game. I had never truly left. The walls of the cavern, the endless void, the man with the hollow eyes, they were all part of it. They were the keepers of the game, the twisted architects of a nightmare that I would never escape. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were deafening. They clawed at my mind, scratching at the edges of my sanity. "Choose," they hissed. "Choose again." I tried to scream, to fight back, but it was useless. The game had already claimed me. There was no escape from this nightmare. There never would be. Final thoughts, the twist. As the screen fades to black, a chilling realization sets in. The viewer, like the players trapped in the Squid Game, is left with an unsettling truth. The game has no end. The choices they face have no consequence except to draw them further into its dark embrace. The terror they've experienced, the nightmare they've lived through, will never truly release them. And so, the cycle begins again. The screen flickers. The whispers echo. And somewhere in the distance, the hum of the Squid Game begins to play once more. With that, we have reached the end of our story, leaving the viewer with a haunting sense of the game's inescapable nature. The horror continues, and the darkness remains, unyielding and eternal. Let me know if you'd like to explore more parts or delve deeper into any particular section. I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, my body trembling uncontrollably. I was back in the same room, the walls adorned with the same chilling red light that had haunted me since the very beginning. The hum of the game, low and vibrating, filled the air once more, reverberating in my bones. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder that nothing had changed. The room was identical, but this time, there was no creature, no twisted figure looming over me. For a moment, I thought I had broken free, that I had somehow escaped the horrors. But I knew better now. The silence was deafening, and the stillness only deepened my dread. Then, slowly, the walls began to shift again. The familiar shapes began to twist and distort, as if the very fabric of this world was alive. The darkness that once enveloped me now crept into the corners, gathering like an insidious force ready to pounce. I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me, unsure of where to go or what to do. I couldn't run. There was nowhere to hide. This was the game. The game that had become my prison. The door opened in front of me, its black surface gleaming in the dim light, and I knew what was coming. I couldn't resist anymore. With a trembling hand, I stepped forward. The room beyond the door was different this time. The walls were high, towering above me. The floor was slick and cold, with the faintest glow emanating from beneath the cracks in the stone. I could feel the presence of something watching me, lurking just beyond the walls. The hum grew louder, its rhythm a constant thrum against my chest. The whispers returned. Choose, choose again. I stumbled forward, the air thick with tension. The path before me stretched on endlessly, a maze of shifting walls and broken mirrors. The reflections that lined the hallways were twisted, grotesque versions of myself, their eyes hollow, their mouths gaping open in silent screams. I reached for the nearest mirror, my fingers grazing the cold glass. The reflection in the mirror twisted, contorted, becoming something monstrous. My own face stared back at me, but it was not me. It was a creature, a thing with sharp teeth and hollow eyes. I recoiled, stepping back, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Do you recognize it? The voice echoed. Do you see the monster within? I shook my head, unable to form words. It was true, though. I saw it in the reflection. The fear, the anger, the desperation that had consumed me. The darkness I had tried to hide. It was me. A door at the end of the hallway creaked open, and the faintest light spilled from it. I had no choice. I had to move forward. There was nowhere to go but deeper into the maze. The door led to another room, but this one was different. It wasn't a simple hallway or a dark void, it was a room set up for a twisted game, one that tested not just my body, but my mind. The walls were lined with strange symbols, the air thick with the scent of burnt incense. A table sat in the center, and on it lay a strange, pulsing object. It looked like a heart, but it was made of glass, shifting with strange colors and glowing softly. I stepped closer, my heartbeat quickening as I reached out to touch it. The moment my fingers brushed against the surface, the room began to tremble. The lights flickered, and the ground beneath me shook. A mechanical noise echoed in the air as the symbols on the walls began to glow, their meaning becoming clear, each one represented a challenge, a choice that I would have to make. The voice returned, louder now. Choose, player. The game is not over yet. Suddenly, the room was filled with doors. Dozens, hundreds of them, all opening at once, revealing terrifying landscapes. Some were filled with fire, others with water, and some with pure darkness, threatening to consume everything in their path. Behind each door, I could see a glimpse of what lay beyond. They all promised an escape, but I knew better. Each one was a lie. A trick. Another twisted test. The glass heart pulsed again, as though urging me to decide. I was trapped in a never-ending cycle of choices, each one leading deeper into the nightmare. I turned toward the farthest door, the one at the end of the hall. It was different from the others. There was no light shining from within, no ominous sounds. It was silent. A single beam of light shone through the cracks, illuminating the door. I had no idea what awaited me behind it, but I had no other choice. I had to move forward. The game was calling. I opened the door, heart pounding, unsure of what I would find. The light from within was blinding, almost painful, but as I stepped through, it faded, and I found myself in another room, this one even larger than the last. The ceiling stretched high above me, disappearing into a darkness that seemed to swallow the very air. In the center of the room, a figure stood waiting. It was tall and cloaked in black, its face hidden beneath a shadowy hood. The moment I entered, the figure turned, and I felt its gaze pierce me to the core. Its eyes gleamed, burning with a sickening light. "You've come far, player," it spoke in a voice that chilled me to my very bones. "But the final test is upon you. You must face the Keeper." The figure stepped aside, revealing a massive throne of black stone. Sitting upon it was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen, its body twisted and malformed, its skin pale and cracked like ancient stone. Its eyes, however, were the most terrifying. They were not hollow, like the other creatures I had encountered, but burning with an unnatural fire, an insatiable hunger. The Keeper rose from its throne, and its massive wings unfurled, casting a shadow over the entire room. It took a step forward, and I could feel the ground tremble beneath me. The choice was clear. Fight or fall. "Will you survive?" the Keeper growled. "Or will you become part of the game?" Without warning, the Keeper lunged at me, its claws tearing through the air with terrifying speed. I barely had time to react before it was upon me. I ducked and rolled, barely avoiding its first strike, but the force of the creature's movement sent a shockwave through the room, knocking me to the ground. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I desperately tried to keep my distance. The Keeper's wings flapped violently, sending gusts of wind that made it difficult to breathe. The air was thick with smoke and ash, and I could taste the bitterness in the back of my throat. I glanced around the room for any weapon, any means of defense, but there was nothing. No escape. No way out. Just the Keeper and me. It grinned, its teeth jagged and sharp, as it lunged again, faster this time. I barely dodged in time, but I felt its claws scrape against my shoulder, leaving a burning wound. I cried out in pain but pushed through, determined not to let it consume me. This was the final trial. The Keeper of the game wasn't just an obstacle, it was a symbol. A representation of everything I had faced up until now, my fear, my regret, my guilt. Every monster I had encountered was just a reflection of my own inner demons. And now, I was being forced to confront them head-on. The Keeper howled in rage as I pushed myself to my feet, ready to face it one final time. The game had never been about winning. It was about survival. Survival of the mind, the soul, the will to keep going, no matter the odds. I was ready. The world around me warped, twisting like a shattered reflection in a cracked mirror. I was no longer in the grassy field, nor was I back in the dark maze. I was in limbo. The air was thick with shadows, their shapes moving just beyond my vision. The once bright sky now appeared as a swirling vortex of black and gray clouds, the wind carrying with it a whispering, taunting voice that seemed to come from all directions. "You can never escape." I tried to move, but my feet were frozen to the ground, as if the earth itself was holding me in place. The voice, familiar and unsettling, echoed again, this time louder, more insistent. I had been here before, or so I thought. It was impossible to tell. Was I dreaming? Was I dead? Or was this part of the game? I couldn't make sense of it anymore. The rules kept shifting, bending with every thought, every breath. Suddenly, the shadows around me began to coalesce, forming into shapes, figures, creatures, and nightmares I had faced throughout the trials. The girl with the empty eyes, the monstrous Keeper, the haunting whispers that never stopped, they were all here, circling around me. I felt their eyes on me. They were judging me. "You failed," one of the figures hissed. "No," I protested weakly, my voice barely audible in the suffocating silence. "I survived. I fought through it. I escaped." But the figures didn't respond with words. They simply closed in, their shapes growing larger, more menacing, as if to drown me in my own fears. "You're not free," the keeper's voice came from the darkness. It was a low growl, a promise of things far worse to come. "You'll never be free." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the visions, but they flooded my mind. The shadows were growing, the figures were becoming more grotesque, their forms distorting in a maddening swirl of chaos. My heart raced, and my breath came in short gasps. The world was spinning, my thoughts swirling in the same dark vortex. Had the game even ended? Or had I simply entered a new level, a deeper layer of torment? I opened my eyes again, but now the world around me had shifted completely. I was standing in front of a mirror, a massive, ancient mirror that stretched from the floor to the ceiling. I barely recognized myself in its reflection. My face was gaunt, my eyes hollow, the skin stretched tight against my skull as if I hadn't slept for days, or years. I reached out to touch the glass, but as my fingers brushed against it, the reflection moved on its own. It didn't mimic my movements, it was alive. A twisted version of me, with eyes that glowed faintly red, stepped forward and grinned, a smile that was wide and unnatural. "Is this what you've become?" the reflection whispered, its voice a distorted version of my own. I recoiled, stumbling backward, but the reflection didn't stop. It reached out toward me, its hands smashing against the glass with an ear-splitting crack. The glass rippled, distorting the image of the monster that was once me. "You were never meant to win. You can't escape your own darkness." The reflection reached for me, its fingers coming through the glass as though it were nothing more than smoke. I backed away in horror, but the reflection was faster, its fingers wrapping around my wrist. The chill of its touch sent a shock through my body, as if my very soul were being pulled through the mirror. I tried to scream, but the reflection mirrored me, its scream louder and more frantic than my own. "Welcome to your nightmare," it hissed, dragging me closer to the glass. The world around me began to fade, and I realized, this was the game, after all. Not the maze, not the trials. It had always been about me facing my own fears, my own guilt. And I was losing. Suddenly, the mirror shattered, sending shards of glass flying in every direction. I was thrown backward, my body slamming into the cold, stone floor. Pain surged through me, but I forced myself to move, to stand up and face the nightmare that was consuming me. The room around me was no longer the vast, empty space I had seen before. It was a labyrinth, twisting and turning in impossible ways. The walls seemed to shift as I moved, closing in on me, like the game was reconfiguring itself once more. My breaths were shallow, my heart pounding like a drumbeat in my ears. I ran, my feet scrambling across the jagged floor. But the walls were closing in, too fast. Too close. The maze was alive, and I was trapped inside it. My thoughts were racing, trying to figure out a way out, but every turn, every corner, led to another dead end. I looked up and saw a door at the far end of the hall. It was different from the others, ancient, with symbols carved into the wood that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow. It felt like it held the key to ending this nightmare. I had to get to it. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the pain that shot through my legs. I reached the door, my hands trembling as I gripped the handle. The door was ice cold, but I turned it anyway. It creaked open, revealing a room bathed in crimson light. And there it was. The heart. The same glass heart I had seen before, pulsing with unnatural energy. But this time, it was different. The heart was larger, more powerful. It seemed to be the source of everything, the game, the terror, the endless torment. It was beating, slowly, like a slow, rhythmic drum. The voice returned, soft and deadly. "Destroy it," it whispered. "End the game." I didn't hesitate. I reached for the heart, my fingers curling around its smooth surface. It was cold, far colder than anything I had ever touched. My pulse raced as I held it in my hands, feeling its energy pulsing with mine. I closed my eyes and squeezed. The heart shattered. The sound was deafening, the glass breaking into 1,000 shards that scattered across the floor. For a moment, everything went still. The walls of the maze, the dark corridors, and the creatures that haunted me all seemed to vanish in that instant. But then, the room began to tremble. The ground beneath my feet cracked open, and a wave of energy rushed through the air, knocking me to the ground. I gasped for air, the intensity of the moment overwhelming me. I had destroyed the heart, the source of it all, but in doing so, I had triggered something far worse. The shadows returned, thicker and darker than ever before. They swarmed, forming into creatures with glowing eyes, clawing at the air. They circled around me, their whispers growing louder and louder. "You should have never destroyed it," one of the shadows hissed. "You can't escape," another voice growled. I stood up, blood rushing to my head, my thoughts spinning. The game had ended, but had it really? I had destroyed the heart, but the terror, the horror, it wasn't over. I was still trapped. Suddenly, the room began to fade again, the edges blurring into nothingness. I felt myself being pulled, dragged into the very core of the game. It wasn't a game at all. It was a cycle, a trap. A prison. The darkness consumed me once again. And then, there was nothing. Final thoughts. The screen fades to black, leaving only the faint hum of the game echoing in the void. The protagonist's fate is sealed, forever trapped in the endless cycle of horror. They fought, they survived, but ultimately, the game never truly ends.